Okay, so this is where Michelle no longer speaks to me again, ever probably. Some of you will know that we've, for some considerable time, had this Conspicuous Contribution Award, and we introduced it because we wanted a way of saying thank you to people who'd made a big contribution to LINX over the years, and it took a while for us to actually bring this about. It was first awarded in 2006. And it's probably easier if I just talk about the people who are on the Roll of Honour, because I think then it kind of characterises things. So the first recipient was Nigel Titley, who is here today and indeed presented today, pretty much as he has in every LINX meeting in living memory. Nigel's had to run off, so it's kind of a shame. He did know I was going to do this, though, so I'd had a word with him earlier. Nigel has it's probably easier for me to speak about him now he's not in the room. Nigel has the distinction of being one of the founders of LINX in both senses of the word. So he was personally responsible for BT being one of the 6 or 7 original founders. And how do I tell this story delicately? I don't think he told headquarters that he was doing it, and that might have had something... yeah, we'll draw a veil over the rest of that. Nevertheless, I think it had an incredibly positive and energizing effect on the early LINX, because in most of the rest of Europe, the ex-PTTs, which of course is what BT were, they were the first ex-PTT, hadn't typically joined the early internet exchanges, and so it made a huge difference to us. The second recipient was Richard Clayton. We kind of got the bit between our teeth in those early years in recognising some people who'd made a huge contribution. We haven't seen Richard at a meeting for a long time now, but Richard managed to make a contribution in a completely different way. He authored a lot of the early key documents that pulled LINX together in the non-peering sense. So in the days when things like spam and spam relays were an enormous problem, and LINX was one of the few communities that could actually do practical things about that, Richard was there being the kind of eminence grise behind all of that, and he's now a serious academic, which I think he found the right home for himself in terms of the sort of work that he did and still does in terms of investigation. It would be nice to see Richard again. I actually met him last Christmas, and we talked about him coming to make a presentation at a meeting, but he was on, how shall I say, somewhat controversial ground, so more work was needed, and that's still possible. So it'd be really nice to see him again. Then we had Clive Feather. We had a memorable recognition of Clive, because those of you with any memory of him will remember that he had a mustache, and we arranged one of the LINX socials to secretly give out false moustaches to the entire audience, and everybody wore them whilst he was presented with his award. Clive was a sort of proto-Malcolm, so in the days when we actually couldn't afford to have someone working for us in a public affairs function, he was somewhat nefariously, I'm going to regret saying all this on the record, aren't I? Somewhat nefariously seconded to us to do those kinds of things, because the pressures were there. There was no ISPA at the time, or it was only very early ISPA, and government tended to ask us questions about how this funny internet thingy worked. And Clive was very instrumental in those early days of trying to formulate what should our response be to bits of legislation and so on. We then took a completely sideways step, as you'll see, and went away from people who'd been directly involved in our community, in some senses employed by us, because Nigel and Clive served on the board, and Richard was involved in every one of the working groups that LINX tended to use at the time. And so they were very much insiders. And so the next award went to a really close friend of mine called Andre Philip, who many of you know was the person who originally wrote the Bird root server. He actually did it as his university undergraduate or graduation project, and it's had great life since then, largely because those two institutions, principally CZ.NIC, but to a lesser degree NIC.CZ, provided funding and support, and then it got complicated because there was another Andre, and you'll see the team are celebrated on our website. we wouldn't be here today in the form that we are without Bird, because we ran into really, really significant problems with Quagga, which was the root server we depended on before then. I think the existence of Bird spurred on some further development of Quagga, but we're one of the very few large internet exchanges that still use it. And I remember before I left the Eurex board, we checked, and Bird is now pretty much universal in internet exchanges. But on top of that, there are tens of thousands of them in use in other routing applications all over the world. So we thought it was relevant to celebrate that team, and they made an enormous contribution. We then went back to looking at people who'd served us. Raza had by then stepped off the board. It's impossible to describe the contribution that Raza made because they were so far-reaching. In fact, I said today that about the late courses, they wouldn't have happened without Raza's work. He was the person that stepped up from the membership and decided to drive that on. So it was great to recognise Raza. He was also the comedian. He served on the board for a while. As a very introverted person, he used to be the person that watched the behaviour of the rest of us and then would make some pertinent comment that would bring us all back down to earth again. So he was a great, he is a great guy. We do see Raza occasionally, but he doesn't come to many meetings anymore. Then in 2014, we celebrated Graham, who is in the audience. Graham was chairman of LINX for a very long time, had a big role in rescuing LINX from the crisis that occurred when in the year 2000 when there was an attempt to demutualize LINX. So I think it was highly appropriate that we recognize Graham in the way that we did. So now we come to the person who's never going to speak to me again. What can I say about Michelle? Well, I'm going to say some things about Michelle with the hope of maximising the embarrassment since she's never going to speak to me again. So Michelle's been a good friend of LINX for a very long time. In fact, one of the reasons she's going to hate me for this is that I've actually put the number of years on the slide, so I'm going to die a painful death. It really goes back to the beginning and the circumstances of a data center pre-existing LINX's formation. And although there are arguments about which was the first in the world, and indeed even in Telehouse's own history of all of this, they credit their New York data center as pre-existing the one in Docklands. But of course they weren't conceived as data centers. They were conceived as, I've lost the language again, they were disaster recovery places. There were places where you put your mini and mainframe kit because you typically had that data processing equipment, as they called it then, on your own corporate sites. And one day someone said, even before the words risk assessment had ever been uttered together, God, could we go back to those days? What will happen if the on-site machine goes down? And people went, oh crap, we better have a spare one somewhere that we can go back to. And in fact, Telehouse or KDDI, as it was in those days, conceived the idea that there might be a business in hosting such equipment and making it available on hot standby for those situations where people got into trouble. Of course, as computer machinery evolved and minis and mainframes went kind of out of fashion and people started building incredibly powerful kit, Intel-based kit that could go in racks, suddenly there was a demand for, well, where am I going to put my rack? And here's a place that had security, space, power, and they knew about hosting stuff. Well, it was a kind of a natural development, wasn't it? So I don't know, because I wasn't there, quite how the initial relationship was made, but I do know from what Philip Smith told us at the in LINX98 that there'd been a debate amongst those early LINX members about where the physicality of LINX should be. And in a lot of... I'm getting interference. In a lot of those early exchanges, the natural place then seemed to be a university, because that's where the internet was leaking out into the civil world, if you like, or out of the academic world. And indeed, still around Europe today, you'll see some fine internet exchanges run in places like the University of Vienna, University of Oslo, Brussels University, and so on. They were the natural places where, you know, connectivity points kind of leaked out of, or semi-leaked out of the academic world. And I think there was a debate in the LINX community about starting at Queen Mary College, which was one of those nodes where British internet access first grew. But for better or worse, in fact, that wasn't the route they went. And I think we can say that you know, there's possibly an alternative history where perhaps LINX was started in a university, or maybe it had an indifferent host. It had someone who didn't recognize that, you know, there was a really unique opportunity here to do something special. And I think it's to Michelle's credit that she saw that, and that she got the backing of the Telehouse team of the time, who largely have gone now, haven't they? She really is going to kill me. My predecessor, Keith Mitchell, who was the first person seconded to actually work full-time for LINX, you had the great pleasure of working with Keith and then the misfortune of working with me. It's from those early beginnings, something pretty incredible has happened, because I think, well, I guess most of you know, LINX was first hosted inside Telehouse North, that's all there was, and then East was built, and it was at a phase where there simply wasn't enough data center space to satisfy the demand. That's why KDDI invested more. Much more recently, we expanded into Telehouse West, and as you heard from Richard today, we're now looking at the opportunity in Telehouse North too. So LINX has made a significant investment into Telehouse over all these years, but I think on the other side of it, there's been very, very significant support as well. So Michelle has helped us through all of that period. I did check with her that she didn't mind being referred to as LINX's account manager, because I don't think her job title and business cards ever said that. And I think the fact that she understood this opportunity is one of the reasons that stayed constant all these years. You know, it's possible to imagine a situation where, you know, perhaps our early host had been, you know, rather indifferent to what we were and what the opportunity was, but that wasn't the case, I'm pleased to say. And you know, Telehouse is arguably the most connected place on the planet now. There's certainly more ASNs in a single place there than even some of the fabled sites in the United States. So I'll finish my waffling by saying we're incredibly grateful to Michelle in particular, and to Telehouse generally, for the support they've given us over the years. And I think it's appropriate to recognise her for the constancy that she's shown to us over that time. And I have what, for many reasons, will be the last of these awards, because we'll probably change the style of it for other reasons, which we'll explain another time. But I'm very pleased to honour Michelle, and I hope you'll join me in applauding her for her efforts over the years. Thank you. And now I'm going to give her the microphone and run away, because I'm really frightened of what she's going to say.
Well, actually, I don't know what to say. I suppose what comes to mind in polite terms is, oh my goodness. But yeah, John did surprise me, actually, just not very long ago. He did mention this morning, or he made a statement to say, oh, you probably won't be talking to me later. And I didn't pick up on it. But now it's very clear. And yes, you're right. I suppose the other thing that does come through here is that there's obvious implications that, with me being in the industry and with Telehouse for so long and working with LINX, that I'm getting on in years. I'm getting old now, but I'm still quite young at heart. And I think in terms of all of that aside, having had that experience right from almost day one, I've been in a very privileged position that I am very much part of the LINX history. And that's something that's really special. Over the years, working with LINX, as John has said, I'm so glad that the result of the debate was to come and locate in Telehouse in the Docklands, because when that happened, it was a real changing point for us as a company, and for me as an individual, recognising that this was something really innovative, it was something new, it was something very exciting. And at that time, I was fairly new to the industry, so this was really something very special for me. And I think over the years, I've seen LINX and Telehouse grow together. And with LINX, I've seen the innovation, I've seen those pioneering milestones. It's been a case of, again, the synergy between the two companies as we've both gone through various times in terms of the evolution has been fantastic. I will say that there's been some ups and downs. It's not always been so positive, but I think what's been really clear is that when the stuff did hit the fan, the two organisations came together and we could really find a way forward. So again, with both of us and the teams working together, it's been very successful in terms of outcome. So I think I'm not going to say very much more other than it's great to be, again, alongside the people that have received those awards, this award in the past. And I feel really honoured and privileged to be on that list. And I would also like to thank John and the entire LINX team over the years and the LINX team today, and also to the members that, again, I've worked with over the past and have been part of members of LINX and have worked with Telehouse over the span of those 23 years. So thank you very much, much appreciated, and I'll treasure this award. Oh, and just one last thing. If anybody wants to connect to LINX directly in North 2, then see me later. Thank you very much.
I'll make that up somewhere.